My own life is demonstration of the fact that God can change people.
If people had come along at that age and told me, this is how you were born and you can never change, I might have believed them.
There is a way out from a phenomenally destructive lifestyle.
I finally realized that gay was probably what I was, that I just did not have normal heterosexual feelings for women, that I had intense homosexual feelings for men, and I would look at other men as someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with.
John Paulk became a practicing homosexual because he believed one of the most devastating lies ever to take root in our country. A lie that a growing number of Americans are believing. A lie that is affecting every major institution in our society. And most importantly, it is a lie that is tragically affecting growing numbers of individuals, including innocent children and confused and searching youth. What is the lie? That some people are born homosexuals and cannot change. That homosexuality, like race, gender, or ethnicity, is an innate and immutable characteristic, and therefore impossible to change. Hello, I'm John Eldridge. Over the next half hour, we're going to take a look at one of the most controversial issues in American culture today, the issue of homosexuality.
It is far from gay, as anyone who has been in the lifestyle and is honest about it will tell you. In other words, we need to be concerned about this and involved to some degree, out of compassion, out of concern. We need to do what we can in our place and our time to bring God's grace and the light of His truth to bear upon this issue.
We find the clearest theological explanation of the cause of homosexuality in the first chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans, where in verses 26 and 27 we read, "For this reason God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way also the men. Giving up natural intercourse with women, they were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men, and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error."
Two things need to be said about this passage from Romans. First of all, the fact that Paul would discuss homosexuality in the same breath, as it were, that he talks about strife and gossip and foolishness makes it clear that Paul does not consider homosexuality the worst of all sins. What Paul is speaking of here and pointing to is that homosexuality is the result of a disordered life, a life that is not lived in light of the true knowledge of God. If we're going to discuss homosexuality or anything about human sexuality, we must go back to the beginning. We must go back to the book of Genesis, where we are shown that we were created in the image of God. And in the image of God, we are created as male and female. Everything the Bible has to say about homosexuality is set against the backdrop of its positive, normative assessment of heterosexual marriage. Wherever it condemns homosexuality or any sin, it does so because it realizes that it is a distortion of God's original design for human beings as male and as female, and that it goes against this design and undermines their own well-being.
The Bible's clear message about homosexuality has been overshadowed by reports in the media and claims by gay activists that homosexual orientation is a matter of biology. The truth of the matter is that if a person has an ounce of compassion, it's very hard to toe the line on biblical prohibition when it seems like a person just can't help being homosexual.
What recent polls have demonstrated is that there are an increasing number of Americans who are accepting the idea that homosexuals are born that way, and that their exposure to studies that purport to show that have influenced their opinion of homosexuality. Not only in terms of its causation, but in terms of its moral status. Because at the same time that the number of Americans has increased who believe that homosexuals are born that way, the number of Americans who believe that homosexuality is always wrong has decreased. So there's a definite relationship here.
The media has not been helpful in its reporting of recent studies claiming to prove a biological basis for homosexuality. In August of '91, Dr. Simon LeVay published the results of a study in which he claimed to have discovered that a tiny portion of the brain, the hypothalamus, was smaller in homosexuals than it is in heterosexual males, and much closer in size to those of women. The study received international attention and wide media coverage, but what the media failed to report is that first, LaVey couldn't even confirm the sexual orientation of some of his patients, nor could he prove his assumption that the hypothalamus is even connected to sexual orientation. Furthermore, no study has ever replicated LaVey's findings. That same year, two researchers, Michael Bailey and Richard Pollard, published their now famous twin study in the December issue of the General Archives of Psychiatry. The study showed that among identical male twins who share the exact same genetic makeup, if one was identified as homosexually oriented, there was a 52% chance his brother would be as well. For fraternal twins, there was only a 22% chance, and for non-twin brothers, a 9% chance. Again, the media and gay activists announced proof of biological causes for homosexuality. But the study makes the opposite case. If homosexuality were purely a matter of genetics, then the percentage of identical twins both being homosexual should be 100%, not 52%. And second, since fraternal twins and non-twin brothers share the same amount of genetic material, they should reflect the same percentage, not 22% and 9%. There simply is no way that such figures support the genetic theory. And like the LaVey study, the twin study has not been duplicated. Whatever factors may influence a person towards homosexuality, a purely biological explanation will not hold water. Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, a practicing therapist in Encino, California, has treated over 400 clients who have come to him seeking help for their homosexuality.
The best thing that we could say right now when we look at the biological literature is that there might be a temperamental predisposition, not certainly a determining factor. There seems to be certain temperamental types of personality. And given a certain family background, that child with that temperament will go in the direction of homosexuality. And that can be changed by his understanding the causes of his homosexuality. Many of our men that we work with had poor relationships with their fathers, hurtful relationships with the fathers, often but not as frequently over-involved mothers. If they had an older brother, it was an abusive, hostile relationship with an older brother. And also the possibility of sexual abuse in childhood is also an important factor. 1/3 of the men I work with were sexually abused when they were little children by either adults or teenagers.
The experiences in my early childhood that led to my eventual homosexual attractions as an adolescent began very early. Even as young as an infant, my father became upset with my mother as she was comforting me and told her to leave me alone, set me down, and that if she didn't, that I would be being spoiled. And this was a result of my father's jealousy with the bonding that was happening between my mother and myself as her first girl child. At the age of 4, my mother conceived twins. Curly, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, darling, identical twins came onto the scene. I was kind of put on the shelf, at which point my uncle stepped in. My uncle saw an open, vulnerable little girl whom he sexually abused. And before he left for Canada to avoid the draft of Vietnam, he passed the baton on to my brothers. He abused me with my brothers there and showed them how to do it. And my brothers then abused me from the age of 5 to the age of 12. So by the time I got to 14, I was hurting a lot.
When I was growing up, I came from a very insecure childhood background. My parents divorced when I was 7 years old, and that had a profound effect on me as I was growing up. My dad did not have a real strong sense of attachment to me, and so conversely, I was not getting a lot of role modeling from him. He wasn't around much to father me, and so I was basically left with my mother for her to raise me. And I was a real insecure child and had a real sensitive nature. And what I was looking for as a child was a lot of security and a sense of permanence. I think a lot of other kids picked up on that sensitivity and started hurling names at me like queer and sissy and homo. And this seems to be a universal experience for most people that develop a homosexual orientation, as a lot of peer labeling as a young child. For parents that are concerned about homosexuality, possibly in their own child, it's important for you to know that this is not something that God intended for their lives. And if you have a young child that you suspect might be heading in that direction, it's really important for you as a family to have some intervention, to seek out some godly Christian counsel from people that are familiar with the root causes of homosexuality.
Both the clinical experience of therapists and the personal experience of those involved in homosexuality make it clear homosexuals are not born that way. And while the Bible is clear on what's wrong with homosexuality, it is clearer still on the possibility of change and freedom from homosexuality.
For people that may be watching this video, that may be silently struggling, sitting in a church pew, dealing with homosexual feelings, or even being and living in a gay lifestyle or identity, there is hope. There is hope for them to change. They don't have to be trapped and held captive by the desires of homosexuality. But it is a hard road, but it is one that is very possible to overcome.
First and most importantly, they are a person. So you respond in grace. You respond with understanding. You respond having done some study of your own. In other words, become educated. Help yourself to know what's going on here. Christ accepts us as sinners. He accepts us in our brokenness. He does so so that he might, as it were, bring us back to health and to wholeness. That's how we ought to respond to anyone we know who's involved with homosexuality.
Well, the first thing we say that when a client walks in is that you're not homosexual. There's no such thing as a homosexual. You are a heterosexual with a homosexual problem. Your true nature is heterosexuality. So we get rid of the label right there. We talk about the 3 A's: attention, affection, approval. These are the emotional needs. Besides that, there are identification needs. And in the course of therapy, we teach them how to make those connections with men and to meet those same-sex needs in an authentic way, in a more satisfying way. And as they do that, they begin to experience their homosexual attractions as diminishing to the point of becoming unimportant.
For the person who truly wants to change, change is possible. In other words, it is a matter of desire. And that desire often begins with the realization that homosexuality is simply not delivering on its promise of happiness and fulfillment.
At the very foundation of homosexuality is a deep desire to fit in and to belong, because there's a tremendous sense of rejection when you're developing a homosexual orientation. And if you're not raised with a strong sense of who you are and that you're truly loved unconditionally, you will go wherever you can find love and acceptance. And I found that in the arms of other men in gay bars.
Just like everything else of great value in life, change does not come easily or quickly or all at once. Most men and women who have come out of the gay or lesbian lifestyle speak of a long, difficult journey in which God continues to bring about ever deeper healing.
At the time that I actually made the break with homosexual behavior, I was not involved in therapy or in a support group or even reading any literature or anything like that. It was just me and God. At the time that I married, I began to realize that there were a lot of issues having to do with the way that I grew up that needed to be dealt with. There was a lot of deep inner healing that God needed to do in me. I began seeing a therapist who began to deal with some of the issues of sexual abuse and some of the difficulties in relationships in my family. I don't believe anybody is gay or lesbian. I believe they have gay or lesbian relationships, and that we were not created to be homosexual.
And so I decided to give my life to God, and I remembered saying to him, no matter how hard it gets, no matter what you have for me or what comes, I will never turn away from you. And it was solely on the fact of his love and acceptance of me. And that's been 12 years now. And so what has happened in the 12 years that have passed was a long, very difficult journey, trying to discover how to come out of homosexuality, because I just didn't want to stay that way. I didn't want to be a gay Christian. I felt the two were not compatible. I think there's a common misperception of Christians to say, well, if you pray hard enough and if you just do the right things, you'll change, or God will take these things away. But God doesn't always zap things out of our life. God's creation speaks of process. And so through a process, I had to learn to come out of homosexuality.
You may be struggling personally with homosexual feelings or involvement. You may have believed the lie. You may think there is no way out, but there is. And though the path may be tough going, you can find the freedom that you were made to live in.
The road out is a tough one. It's not one to undertake lightly. It's hard. It's probably the hardest thing anybody could ever do. But there's hope, and God can do it. There are resources out there in abundance now. There are books, there are support groups, there's the Exodus Conference, there are churches are becoming more and more understanding and welcoming of people who struggle in this area and want to change. God is opening people's hearts and teaching people how to walk alongside someone who wants to go through the change process. And if you're one of those people, I would just say, go for it. Just put your hope in God and learn to trust Him, and He'll walk you through it.
If you do not know of a church that is responding to homosexuality with the grace and redemptive power of Christ, do not give up. There are churches and organizations, probably near you, that are offering hope. If you would like more information on where to get help for yourself or for someone you know who is struggling with homosexuality, or if you would like to see your church become a source of healing and hope for those seeking freedom which Christ offers, please see the resource guide that accompanies this video. We would also urge you to take a stand against policies or programs that seek to establish homosexuality as a normal expression of human sexuality. Many of our schools do not present the whole truth when it comes to this issue. Many policymakers are seeking to grant homosexuals the right to marry or adopt children. Companies are being pressured to extend their benefit programs to the partners of homosexuals. All of these are ways of spreading the lie, of treating homosexuality as just another way of life. In compassion, we must oppose efforts like these. If anything has struck you in the course of watching and listening to this presentation, we trust that it is this central truth: no one is born a homosexual. No one needs to be caught in the futility and despair and brokenness that are the homosexual lifestyle. Homosexuality is both preventable and treatable. The words of Christ, spoken nearly 2,000 years ago, are true today and addressed to each of us, whatever our situation. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.